Another reason why I really like him is that he's this amazing mentor that is always like lifting his students. So, and he's going to be presenting work that is being done with one of his students. So I want to give Michelle a welcome, a warm welcome from us here at Iowa State. Thank you, Michelle.
Good. Thank you very much for the invitation, Bea. I'm glad that we're able to do this, and it's very kind and apropos introduction because this is a joint work with Travis Tae Oh, who was a former student who is now a professor at Yeshiva University, and he's really deserves the credit for most of the work that I'm about to share because that was based on his dissertation, and this is something that we have worked on for the last, I would say, 4 years or so or more. And this is something that has evolved quite a bit over time. But I think we're pretty pleased with where the project stands. But so I'm glad that Travis is able to join us today as well. So it's a project on fun, as you can tell from the title, and this idea really came to us and through Travis because we were making this observation that there are very large industries and segments of the economies that revolves around the provision of a specific type of experiences, which we would generally call fun. And if you think about the video gaming industry, if you think about the party industry and happy hours, and of course the amusement park, arcades, everything of the type, and cities like Las Vegas, they are all conditioned on a promise of providing fun to consumers, and that really intrigued us into thinking about but then what is fun really, and how can you recreate this overall experience for consumers. And as we sort of look at the literature, one thing that was quite surprising to us, often when you do this type of research, you try to look for references in psychology, and is there anything that psychology can help us in order to start our thinking? And it turns out that the literature in psychology is quite limited, in fact, very limited, and they have not really studied this phenomenon. And so we had to go back to something much simpler, which is to go back to the English dictionaries. And if you look at the English dictionary, they would provide you with a definition, and they would say that fun revolves around enjoyment, amusement, lighthearted pleasure, or the source of that. So you can think about the experience itself or the source of that experience, and connected as well to playful behavior and good humor, or things that are done for amusement in general with that clear, very strong expectation of being serious or malicious. And this is the same definition you would find in other dictionaries as well. So the Webster would say lively, joyous play or playfulness, amusement, sports, recreation, enjoyment or pleasure, etc. And so if you were to summarize and abstract out across, we all understand what the concept is more or less, and the definitions do capture that fairly well. It's so we can understand that when we're talking about fun, we're talking about a pleasurable experience, right? It's about an experience that is hedonically pleasing, that has subjective feelings that are connected to enjoyment and amusement, and then there's a behavioral tendency to be quite playful, right? And so that's what we would consider to be fun in general. Now, once you have a definition, it doesn't tell you how do you get there, and which is what we want to have. And so what we decide to think is that, so now how do you get there? If we know what fun is more or less, one of the things you try to do is see what are the paths to creating fun. And one type of research you could be doing is very descriptive. You could be doing surveys. What do you do for fun? And then you're going to have a whole range of activities that people engage in order to have fun, such as going hiking and going cooking or dancing, playing games, etc. There's a lot of activities that lead to fun, and but knowing the series of activities is not going to be particularly helpful for two reasons. First of all, there's so many different activities to begin with, and the second reason is that not everybody likes the same activities. Different people do different things for deriving fun, and that prompted us to think about another level of theorizing that is not about looking descriptively at the activities that people engage in, but try to think about the psychological pillars of fun. Because the idea that are there some common principles across all these activities, regardless of what you like, that would explain jointly how do people actually achieve this experience of fun and why. And we call these the psychological pillars. And so our whole research is really about trying to understand what are the major mechanisms or the major psychological requirements for consumers and people in general to be experiencing this experience that we call fun. And as we did this, the intent was twofold. The primary intent for us was to help businesses that are revolved around the promise of providing fun to consumers. It's about the engineering of fun. And so you want to know the mechanisms for that would enable you to do that. And the other secondary promise is directed at consumers themselves. That we all as consumers would like once in a while to have fun. And the question is that do we have something to contribute to tell people how to have fun and how to have happiness? Because you will see that fun is connected to happiness as well. So that's really the agenda of the research. And as I told you that, if you look at the psychological literature, you're not going to find much on the concept of fun. And so we had to do a broader search and to try to have a broader understanding of where fun emerged and how it emerged over time. And that sort of forced you to look at a slightly different level of analysis. And one of the ways we looked at that is just to sort of think about the concept. When did it enter the English language? So if you go to dictionaries, and you try to trace the etymology of the term, you would find that the term fun, as we commonly use it today, is a term that entered the English language fairly late, around the 18th century, the middle of the 18th century here. So when you think about fun as lighthearted pleasure of enjoyment, is the first use of that term that is recorded is only in 18th century, in the middle of that. And the use of fun as an adjective, this is fun, or this is a fun game, this is a fun time, is only something that entered in the 19th century. So I cannot argue that the phenomenon is only 18th century or 19th century, but it seems like it's only the 18th to 19th century that we somehow develop a specific word to name that type of experience. And that's somewhat interesting. So now, as you try to look historically at the evolution of that term, one of the things you could do is to sort of trace the use of that term or related phrases in the English language over time. And one of the tools we could use is the Google Ngram viewer that you probably are familiar with, which is basically mining the indexing that Google has done of millions and millions of books, right? And try to somehow look for phrases that appears in those books. And so here's a chart here of tracing the use and the relative use, it's not absolute, but a relative use of the phrase having fun over time. And you can sort of see that, and I'm going to compare that, for example, to another phrase that is at least at the same level of abstraction, the phrase being happy. And you can see that, being happy was essentially flat, has been essentially flat over the last 200 plus years. But whereas fun was pretty much non-existent until the beginning of the 20th century, started growing especially in the second half of the 20th century. And then this accelerated growth here, especially in the last, say, 20, 30 years or so. Having fun seems to have been, as a concept in books, at least, that worthy of being discussed in books, only emerged fairly late, definitely in the 20th century, especially in the second half, and especially in the last 30 years or so. Whereas other emotional expressions that are quite comparable do not exhibit that pattern. And if you try to understand why might this be the case, there is a little bit of literature that exists in the field of sociology. In the field of sociology, there's a subfield of the sociology of leisure. And that gave us a little bit of hint of what might be at work here. It seems that there are two major forces, historical forces, that could explain why fun as a concept emerged in societies overall. The first force is the Industrial Revolution, which you place toward the end of the 18th century to the middle or beginning to middle of the 19th century. And so what happened in the Industrial Revolution is essentially people who were doing different types of labor there is very fragmented, that all of a sudden start concentrating their labor, and the labor force is being concentrated in factories. And people now are actually moving away from their homes to work in another place and work in specific times of the day in dedicated space for work. Okay? And I'll come back to this concept a bit later. But that's what the Industrial Revolution does in general to the societies, and we'll see why it's connected to fun. There's another force that happened a bit later than that, which is the expansion of compulsory and mandatory education, where it started in Prussia, in Europe, went to Denmark, and then to the west of Europe, and went imported in the United States later on. But from the mid 19th century to the beginning of the 20th century, there was compulsory education that somehow grew. So what happens? So the same types of dynamics that had adults who were working in factories, essentially dedicating all their time to do hard things in specific spaces, in specific times of the day, then happened to the children as well, where the children now had to go to school and learn and do hard work, if you will. And then we start actually fragmenting the time that people have into serious times, serious work time, and then light time, times that is not as serious. And so when you think about play for children, play was relegated at certain times of the day, at recess or at home, but definitely not in the classroom, and specific locations in the schoolyard, and maybe again at home, which is the same thing that happened as well in the Industrial Revolutions, where work was happening in specific spaces, and then non-work was supposed to be taking place at specific times outside of those spaces and different times of the day. So we'll see later on when our theory emerges how those forces make a lot of sense. Okay? Travis and I, when we're thinking about these things, that would sort of explain a little bit, and that's what sociologists have picked up on, but then that would not explain again what is happening later here. And as Travis and I were thinking more about this, we thought about more like marketers now, we thought that there was also marketplace factors. In the 20th century, there was a series of forces that revolve around the mass production and commercialization of entertainment. Right? So in 20th century, at the beginning, around 1920s, 1930s, you have the emergence of Hollywood and therefore the movie industry. You have in the second half of the 20th century, you have television that expands. You have, of course, the automobile and the emergence of amusement parks. So essentially, forms of entertainment become mass-produced, mass-distributed, much more accessible. So these are the tools that we think help magnify a series of psychological forces that accrued at the macro level, at the societal level, because of the two earlier movements, industrial revolutions and compulsory education, and are responsible for fun as it exists today. So that's the background that we think is at work, and on which the psychology that we're going to discuss really is grounded. So so we went on to, and by the way, I'm speaking, and I don't, feel free to interrupt me or ask question or raise your hand. I have a whole monitor with everybody's video on it. So if there are questions, feel free to ask those. So we, and when I say we, Travis really was the one doing the hard work. We engaged on this very, we thought this is a problem for which, because there was no theory really that we can rely on, we had to build the theories. And for that, we thought we need to take a more qualitative approach for doing it. And so we ended up doing this multi-method investigation that had a level of qualitative analysis that based on the approach of grounded theory development, which and this was based on death interviews and written narratives, and we had a lot of data there. And then we went more quantitative, if you will, do theory validation and theory testing, using structural equation modeling. And then we did some experiments to help to refine the concepts and locate the concepts and contextualize the concepts more. And then we're going to wrap up at the end with back to things that are somewhat more qualitative with what we call a photoethnography at the back end. So these are the bulk of the data that we have shared in the paper that was circulated earlier. We have more data. In fact, Travis has a lot more data that we cannot share in this 1 hour window, but that's the bulk of the story is in the data that I'm going to try to share with you. So we start with the qualitative, and I'm going to be spending about most of my time really on the qualitative, because this is really what I think is the most interesting, is really where the theory emerged. It will give you more of the granularity of the phenomenology of fun as expressed by consumers, and the rest I would say is more like more like icing on the cake kind of thing, because to be honest, the data I will give you here basically confirms what we have observed already through the qualitative. But the qualitative, I think, is really what is the most insightful and the most revealing. So part of the qualitative analysis, we had two types of data. One was death interviews, and death interviews. Travis spent a lot of time, I think it's probably a year and a half or so, interviewing different informants, and it was not random. It was like relatively systematized in the way people were approached and selected. And so we started first at recruiting people from the behavioral labs, but then once concept emerged, it gave us ideas about who else should be recruited, etc. And then we went like this and go back to the concepts and strategize about who else, etc. So in all, there were 21 interviews that were conducted, and you can sort of see, and we have used pseudonyms here, but we have a broad range of demographics, if you will. So we have, of course, some students, graduate students, some teachers, retired teachers, college professor, an English professor, college professor, freelancers, a chef, and we even casino dealers, sushi chefs, marketing person. We also have even a homeless, which I'll talk about a bit later, and who was an example of how the sampling of those informants was done. Okay? So that's one corpus of data that we have. Travis spent about 45 minutes to 2 hours with them, and had the recordings of most of these discussions here, transcribed these, and he and I spent a lot of time going over this in an iterative way to sort of understand what were the things that were being said and what they meant. The other corpus of data that we had were we call these personal narratives. So we basically run an MTurk survey, so the respondents are simply MTurks. But the advantage of doing that is that we were able to get a pretty broad geographic representations of respondents, and we asked them to tell us about a recent experience where they really had fun, and tell us more about it, and then try to give us a little bit of an analysis of why do you think it was, well, what in particular was really fun about the experience. And I've been a pretty vocal skeptics of MTurk research, because I think we do too much of that in our field. But I must say that we were surprised by the quality of the data we got, and I think that has to do with the subject. People really enjoy describing experience of fun, because this is about something that's personally relevant, and second is really pleasant to be talking about when you're having fun. So they're really very eager to share that. And to give you a sense of the average response, about 332 words, and that would be about that amount of text it would give us on average. You see that. So people were really pretty happy to talk, and the data that they gave us was really rich. So we sort of went. So we had this corpus of data, and it's about, to give you a sense, of about 70,000 words in total of text that we reviewed and analyzed, and re-reviewed and analyzed and over and over again. And out of that, we came to the realizations that there are two fundamental pillars of the experience of fun. And the first one is something that we label hedonic engagement. And so here's a definition of hedonic engagement. We define that as an active involvement in immersion into an activity that is intended for pure enjoyment. Okay, so what is important for an experience of fun, and that we see over and over again across the various narratives, is that people are psychologically engaged into an activity. Right. So if you are detached from something, you can't be fun. So you have to be mentally, psychologically engaged. And second, this activity is one that is done for enjoyment. Okay, so where I'm doing it for pleasure, if you will. It's not something that I do for an external motive. So it's not something I do for work. It's not something that I do because of pressure, etc. Okay, and so I'll give you some examples of some of the narratives that explains that illustrates that. So he's a woman from California, and she's sharing, my friend and I decided to try one of those escape rooms. You may know what escape rooms are, presumably, things. And wow, that was so much fun. We had to work through together to solve puzzles, to get out of each room, and nothing was too hard. And the stories surrounding each piece were really engaging. So she's really, really into it, and she's trying to solve the problems, but they're not too difficult, right? So that's why they are able to stay engaged to it. But that's really the essence of what we're talking about. Here's another story. This is a woman who attended a Renaissance fair. So people who are in costumes and reproduce medieval times. And it was fun because you get to play and pretend a little while, and the performers encourage you to interact with them and in character and play around you and your responses. It's a lot of fun to be immersed mostly in this fake or other time period and just play around like you are a kid playing pretend. So the idea that you're clearly into it, right? So she is really immersed literally in that other world, other time that was created artificially by that Renaissance fair. Here's another one here. One of the things that comes along with this engagement is that it's a sense of timelessness. People sort of lose track of time, and that's a very common pattern, which is quite intuitive. You know that people say, "Hey, time flies when you're having fun," so you tend to lose the sense of time. But that has to come. That comes from that hedonic engagement. I rarely enjoy video games anymore because of how busy I am. But this weekend, I had a lot of free time available, so I could relax and just go all out. So again, completely engaged. After playing a couple of hours of that game, I switched to Skyrim, which I hadn't played since last year. I stayed up very late, just exploring and relaxing, and then played until 3 o'clock in the morning. So clearly, these people lose themselves; they completely immerse themselves, and that is one of the components of the experience of fun. So that is, when you think about that component, it probably some of you it might remind you of something that has been discussed a lot in the literature, the concept of flow in the literature. People will say, "Oh, you know what? Hey, you lose track of time. You basically completely into something that looks like flow." And this is a concept that definitely bears some similarity with our concepts, but there are some differences. And so the relative to hedonic engagement, flow activities tend to be ones in which the person is actually pursuing some specific goal. So you may be playing tennis and you have a great session. You're just hitting the ball and it's so smooth. All your strokes are so seamless. The balls always go where you want to go, but you have an expectation that this is what I want to achieve. Okay. And the flow also involves the application of skills. Again, I'm playing tennis, or I'm playing a great performance of piano, for example. So here in flow, you really have an optimal application of skill. And in the theory of flow that Csikszentmihalyi advances, he really discusses that you get that experience when there's this optimal, balancing of your skills with the requirements of the situation. And this is right when this is a perfect alignment. This is really when you experience flow, which is hedonically pleasant. But in our reviews of what we find is that most of the experiences that people say are having fun are qualitatively different. It's not things for which skills and goals are important. It's not things for which people have a strong expectation of performance or enjoyment. In fact, if you want to perform too well or too much, it tends to decrease the fun, right? And so some of the testimonies that Travis collected, for example, from casino dealers in Las Vegas, was that they were saying, hey, You can sort of see these people, when the stakes become too high, they don't have fun anymore, right? So people have more fun at the low stake tables than they do at the high stake table. And part of it is because as soon as you raise the stake, as soon as you become more performance focused, it's not fun anymore. It's outside of the realm of the hedonic engagements we're talking about. The second, yes,
we
please,
have a couple of questions
oh, yes,
/ good comments on the chat that I just wanted to make sure
yes, please,
I think it's a good time to mention them.
Please do that,
so
because
Ashley was
I'm not
asking,
monitoring that. Okay.
Ashley was asking about the role of fear. So like if you're in a roller coaster or a haunted house, and then Samantha also commented that, sometimes that adrenaline rush is part of the of fun activities. So I know that you talk a lot about the relation to happiness on the paper, but what about fear?
Let me come back to fear. I mean, let me come back to the fear after I've discussed the second pillar. And I think once you know the second pillar, you will realize why the roller coaster experience is one that can be fun. But you will know when it's fun. You will realize it's fun mostly when you come out of the roller coaster, not when you're on a roller coaster. And when you see the second pillar, you will see what it is. Okay, so the second pillar that we observe repeatedly is a sense of liberation, and so what was striking to us when we review these narratives is how frequently people use expressions such as, "Oh, I was free, I was carefree, let loose, loosen up, wild, going all out, feeling like a kid." So people feel like there's a sense of freedom, okay, that seems to be attached onto this hedonic engagement that elevates an experience as one of fun. One of the interviewees that we did was with someone that we're gonna name Greg here, who's a Greek American a retired teacher. He teaches languages and he's retired, and he's quite a character, and he loves dancing. And so when he talked about his fun experiences, he would rely on, he mentioned this notion that, for example, I love dancing, and so, you should. So what makes dancing fun? Because total abandon. You get inspired by the music, you jump up and down. Oh, you should have seen it in my youth, and then total abandon again, and then like you let go of the worries, you let go of everything, you get up and dance. In fact, in the middle of the interview, he actually stood up and started dancing during the interview, right? So other words here, he's a person, he's a male who is talking about a karaoke party for his brother. So my brother's birthday party, we went to a karaoke bar and sung songs until 3 a.m. We delegated our task to a few people. So, I'm free because there's no work to be done because everybody actually is dividing the work. So we're not overly burdened. And then it was pretty wild. Again, it's liberation. Then everyone was drunk and just having a great time. By the way, alcohol comes up regularly, as you will see, as in experiences of fun. And that's consistent with this notion of liberation. There's here's one here, another one that mentioned alcohol and other things, by the way, besides alcohol. Last time I really had fun was when I went to Tahoe with my friends over the summer. We had rented a 10-person cabin, packed for 3 days, drunk like there was no tomorrow. I couldn't remember the last time I smiled and laughed that much. It was so liberating. She actually used the word liberating. Right? So clearly there's a sense of freedom that seems to be very central to the experience of fun. Now, we use the word liberation and not freedom for a specific reason, because there's something else that they mentioned that is not just freedom. What was also very common is that they also talk about freedom from something. And they often talk about the contrast of where they're trying to move away from. And so they would use such expressions such as a break from, being away from, get away, forget about, escape. These are a lot of the expressions revolves around somehow escaping from something. And so here's one here. So very often it would be could be escaping for family chores, for example, or work. So this is someone here is a male from Minnesota. I found a few days ago on Halloween when I spent a whole day with my three little sisters. All I've been doing the past year is work, work, work. It was a nice break to just spend the day with my sisters. I felt as if I was free on Halloween because I was not working and I was just enjoying the day with my family and sisters. So the contrast of where they're moving away from is a very prominent theme we hear from people. And so now you can sort of see, I'm going to remind you a little bit of the Industrial Revolution comment I made earlier. You remember one of the major historical impact of the Industrial Revolution is confining people into workplaces that are dedicated workplaces, which are really arduous and painful, and people have very long hours, and they're not allowed to do anything else, right? And so they're essentially, and so now imagine the tension buildup that this creates for the people who work in those factories. And then, of course, once they come out from that, that they feel that they need to somehow have another type of experience that would feel liberating. But it is not just work that people feel liberated from. Here's an interview that was done with a college professor, an English college professor that we're going to call Meg here. And she enjoyed, she discussed the fact that when she goes to conferences like we do, she also has fun. And then because she goes to visit stores, etc. And I don't have to think about the ordinary everyday stuff of my life, like laundry and dishes. And she has a teenage daughter, different emails and whatever. So it's also about getting away also from your life, regular life. It's not just work, it's also having your family duties and responsibilities, etc. That people seem to be relishing when they are having fun. And those constraints, so you see, it's work, it could be family responsibilities, it could also be internalized constraints, personal constraints that you you put on yourself. And so here's a testimony from a lady here who's somehow had her kids going away for a few days, and she was by herself in her house. And then she says, the best moments were where I was eating sweets. I'm overweight, but I'm constantly but I constantly try to watch my diet. So she has this constraining thing. She watches what she eats normally. I don't eat sugar. I try to eliminate carbs altogether. But then she let loose. I say, by giving myself this break, I allowed myself to be naughty. I gave myself permission to rest and to enjoy life for a few days. I sneak into my kids' Easter candy bag. So the kids were away. She takes the candies from the kids. I did not care if I gained 10 pounds. I was just letting myself go. So again, so here she again relaxing a constraint, right? And this was happened to be a self-imposed constraint. It was not work. It was essentially a dietary constraint. So if you put these together, then a better term than freedom is really what we call felt liberation. Okay, a temporary release from various forms of internalized restrictions. And this is something that, and you have accepted that there's some constraints that you have on yourself, but it would be of professional natures, it could be parental duties, it could be schoolwork, and some students who actually share similar things. It could be financial constraints, it could be self-imposed discipline, such as diet. And so we see it's a combination of freedom from something, okay? And then now you can sort of see what would be a fun killer, okay? What does it take to kill the fun? And to kill the fun, you take away the freedom for people. Once you impose significant constraint on people, it essentially is a great way to kill the fun. And so we had some of testimony of that in some of the interviews with students who actually either they were studying for exams or they talk about they're looking for work. And so they have these constraints that is over their head, the exam they're spending or the job that they need to find. And these people they go out, they do the same type of activities that are normally fun, such as meeting with their friends, and they don't have fun because it's hard to have fun unless you feel free. The most I would say telling story about that is this homeless person that I mentioned to earlier. So she's in her 40s, etc. And then so when Travis interviewed her, she actually tells very eagerly about an experience of fun she had, and she was when she was a child, and she went with her grandparents to some kind of amusement park, etc. And she had a great time. She goes in great details talking about that experience. And then she says, that was the last time I had fun. Because since then, she has been so constrained, trying to find, she doesn't have a shelter. She has to find money every time, etc. And she basically can't have fun. So the idea of having this kind of constraints imposed on you, the freedom taken away from you to do whatever you want, is a big killer. But she can have other type of experiences that are pleasant. So she has moments of joys and happiness, etc. But fun is not one of them. So if you put these two pillars together, that's sort of how we see them really as joint forces, two things that have to happen together to really create fun. And so there are tasks that are neither engaging hedonically nor liberating. So you do commuting, you do repetitive work, house chores. Okay, of course, this is not fun, right? Now, there are a bunch of tasks that could be very engaging and pleasant to do, but they will be pleasant, but they will not necessarily be fun. So if, for example, you might go to listen to a beautiful classic symphony concert, you would enjoy it, but that would not be a classic fun experience. You say, oh yeah, I love it, I'm happy, but not necessarily would say it's fun. And conversely, you can have things that feels liberating in some way, but that would not be fun, right? So you get up from work, or you're relieved from a medical threat, diagnosis that what you thought threatening. You paid your loans. All those things feel liberating, but they will not be fun either. And really, it's a combination of those two together that really creates the experience of fun. Okay, and all right. So, are there any questions, Bea, at this point before I continue? Anything else in the chat box?
No, I think we just have another comment on escapism that could be, watching a sad movie and you're also being entertained, even though it's not necessarily, a positive depiction of life.
So I think it's a good example. So you can have then liberation. It's a good example of liberation, but it would not be the classic fun experience. You would say, I enjoyed the movie, but you wouldn't say, I mean, you come out to see I would say Schindler's List, right? And it really is a great movie. You would enjoy it, but you don't come out and say, oh wow, that was fun, right? No. You say, I love it, but you're not going to say that was fun, right? Because that was not a hedonically pleasant movie to watch, even though it was very engaging, right? And so now go back to the roller coaster example. You can sort of see what happens is that you have a threat that is present at you. It's when you are in the roller coaster, you scare the hell of it, and then you arrive safely at the bottom, and that big threat has been suddenly relieved from you, and then now say, oh, that was fun. So you really have that very engaging experience, right? But then the liberation arises because you arrive safely at the bottom, right? And so that's I think what is driving for those people who enjoy the roller coaster experience. That is our analysis of why they enjoy it. It's because the liberation that arises when they are at the bottom of the roller coaster.
I have a question. If
yes, please go ahead, Ashley.
Because I'm trying to grasp it. So, savoring a glass of fine wine as a very specific example, versus like wine tasting and even traveling through the wine country and wine tasting, which we would consider fun, I think,
yeah.
right? So what is the difference there then that makes it fun versus just enjoyable?
Okay, well, first of all, you're not discussing describing the same experience. I mean, they are thematically connected, but I would actually, if I just take a glass of wine, I would enjoy it a lot, right? And it would not necessarily have fun, but I would actually, it's a pleasant hedonic experience that you have, very engaging. So that's why we put it right here. Now, what makes it fun is the fact that it's part of a trip, and now one of the because it's part of a trip, then you have it's going to be connecting to my next set of topics here, which we call situational predictors. There are certain factors that enhance your liberation. For example, one of it is novelty, right? The fact that now you're going to be tasting different wines, right? And then there's an element of spontaneity, because now you have your car and you drive to different actually chateau, to different vineyards, and then you have an element of spontaneity. And so the other things is that you start talking to people, and you're relating to your friends who are with you on that trip, or with the wine connoisseur who sells you the wine. And then there's an element we call social connectedness. And so there's all these other elements that become layered over the wine drinking experience. And this is what really makes the fun, not the wine itself.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. In fact, that's a great segue into my next set of slides here, which is really the fact that there are, as we try to analyze this, there are also situational factors that enhance the experience of fun. But the way they do it is by either actually increasing your hedonic engagement or increasing your sense of liberation, or both, right? And so we call these the situational facilitators. And I just labeled you a few of them. And those ones are the reasons why the variety of activities that you see like shaded in the background here are contributing to fun. Right? So we define situational facilitators as key aspects of the situation that help amplify the experience of fun, either by increasing the level of hedonic engagement or by enhancing the sense of liberation. So think of it. So these are additional variables that in a path model would have impacting fun, but that will be mediated through the hedonic engagement or sense of liberations. And so these are the hedonic engagement and sense of liberation are the necessary ingredients, right? And these are different pathways to get there. These are not necessary and sufficient. They just happen to help, but provide they at least contribute to hedonic engagement or to sense of liberation. And as we review those ones, there are more than four, we think, but we noticed there were at least four in at least the data that we looked at. One is novelty, another one is social connectedness, another one, third, spontaneity, and the fourth one is spatial and boundedness. Okay, so I think the first one is relatively obvious, right? So it's more fun to do something that is new or that feels fresh, right? And so they often would mention things first time, never done before, etc. And in these, in the interest of time, I'm not going to read you all the vignettes, but we have a lot of these things. First time attending a sporting event, or not having done it for a long time. So it's not just a novelty, it's really relative novelty. So it feels relatively new to you. So it could have been something you've done before, but just doing it after a while is a very common theme that you have as well. Okay, and so it could be friends that you haven't seen in a long time. So there's lots of those things that speak to relative novelty. But that's relatively intuitive. The second one that perhaps it's might not be as obvious, but then it makes sense after you think about it, is what we call social connectedness. Is that we understand that it's more fun to do things with someone else, right? And but what we found in our analysis is not just with someone else, but in being connected, feeling connected in the moment with someone else. That's what seems to be driving the fun here. And so he was sharing a fishing trip with his friend, and we had a great time sitting on the water and talking about random topics. So they're talking; they're not just there together, but they are interacting. So this is really social connectedness. We had some lunch that we had packed. We stopped to take a few pictures of the lake and surrounding trees. Then we showed each other a few of the pictures and talked about them. So really, you see, they're really connected. They're really bonding together. The trip home took a while, but we had fun in the car talking about our day and joking about how we could tell everyone we caught 10 fish. In reality, we didn't catch anything. Okay, and so it's really about feeling connected, and it's not just the mere presence of others. So the point is that you can go to a party and not have fun, because if you're in a party there and you somehow there's no one that you can sort of see, you're just not going to enjoy it. It's really that you are part of the party. You feel you're connected. It makes a big difference. And some of the stories that we hear, for example, like people who go to attend a sports event, and they wear the paraphernalia of one or the other team, and just the mere fact that they wear the same paraphernalia, they feel like, okay, I belong there, I'm really part of the experience. That seems to be a contributing factor. And this is something that people are quite aware of. This is, if you ask them what was fun about it, they often point that out. So this is perhaps one of the more intuitive, for which people are this lay theory that, hey, if I am with others and connecting with others, I'm going to be having fun. Now, one of the things that is connected with is interesting in the sociology literature, that there's a few sociological analysis of fun, but they mention and they study that mostly in the context of organizational settings. So and so in organizational settings, people normally don't have fun, right? But they so if you're at work, you supposedly don't have fun that much. But sort of notice that if people do have fun, it will be mostly on people who have the same job title. So the colleagues, so the PhD students have fun together, the faculty have fun together, the deans have fun together, right? But somehow across, you don't have fun together. So the idea that social hierarchies tend to take away from the opportunity to have fun. Why does it? Because it takes away social hierarchies, somehow impedes in the ability to have social connectedness, right? It's easier to connect with someone who has the same level of hierarchies, or if there are no hierarchies at all. That's why very often in accounts of fun, most of the accounts that you get are going to be relating people connecting with family members, okay, or connecting with friends. Now, that being said, it doesn't mean that you cannot have fun by yourself. You can possibly have fun by yourself. And in fact, there's some pretty well-known papers in the CB literature by Rebecca Ratner and Rebecca Hamilton that sort of show that people can have fun by themselves, but on average, it will be maximized or enhanced if you feel socially connected with others. Then there's the pillar number 3 is what we call spontaneity. Is that people will have more fun when there's because if you can be spontaneous, if you don't have to abide by a certain plan, right, then you feel more free. That makes a lot of sense, right? And so any planning that you have to do is much more constraining. And the whole idea and major dynamics of fun is this freedom from constraints, this liberation from constraints. And so a lot of the accounts that we get mention some kind of spontaneous behavior as being contributing to fun. And that there are 2 forms of that. I can be spontaneous because I somehow start doing something that I had not planned, right? And so I remember one account of someone who said, I was, his visa is expired. He's traveling in Europe. His visa is expired. He says, oh, let's say, let me stay on, and I'm going to go, and I'm going to start actually visiting the other countries. And he had not planned that, but that was part of the fun, is the fact that he had not planned it. So that's one form of spontaneity, is to engage in an activity that you not plan, or to change your plan. Okay? There's another form of spontaneity that we see as well, is spontaneity within the activity itself. So it's something that you may have planned the activity, but the way once you get there, you start improvising, you start doing things a bit differently than you might have done otherwise. And those 2 are contributing to experience of fun. So that's part of the reason why I think for those of you, all of you, we attend conferences, and one of the things we enjoy at conferences is the last evening party, right? And so we go there, so you may have planned to go to the evening party, but you go to the evening party, and then what happens is you start walking around and you see different people, right? And so I see Bia, and I go and chat with her 10 minutes, and then I go see someone else, and then maybe I might have a drink, and maybe I go eat some food, and then I see someone else. The mere fact that I can improvise who I go to, etc., that's part of the fun, right? And so so that's what we call fun within, but through spontaneity within the activity. And the last pillar that we have here, and oh my God, I only have like 8 minutes left, is something that's quite paradoxical. And that's something we have to look and read between the lines because they don't say it. People are not very aware of that. But it's something we call temporal and spatial boundedness, is that people have more fun. Fun takes place in a specific location, and it takes place also in specific time. So now go back to this to what I said earlier about sociology of fun, or sociological force of fun. So kids, for example, they're supposed to play and have fun in specific location. They have to go to the schoolyard. This is where you have fun. In the classroom, you're not supposed to have fun, right? And after the Industrial Revolutions, there was a movement for opening and creation of parks, for example, of entertainment places that will become public, And some of the sociologists look at that and say, well, the reason why we have parks was mostly to maintain the productivity of the workforce, because we need to balance all the pressure we put on them inside the factory so that they can have some place that we can let loose that will be in the public places. And so paradoxically, having a space that is designated to have fun within that space is really something that enhances your ability to have fun, right? And so if you think about the typical layout of an amusement park, it would have boundaries around it. And you might be very serious while you drive to the amusement park, but once you're inside the amusement park, you start actually acting silly, you start actually dressing in a costume. When you go to a party or a costume party, that's exactly that. You might, feel a little silly instead of wearing that costume. And once you're inside the party, the room that is dedicated for that, or the time that is dedicated for that, all of a sudden it becomes appropriate for you to be having fun. And so it is. It seems a bit paradoxical, but really it is because of those boundaries, both in time and space, that people really feel really free, because this is earmarked space and time for you to have fun. And that's the weekend effect. If you look at searches for the word fun, you can see in the week, it's always it peaks on Saturday, Friday and Saturday. It goes on down on Sunday. So, and the reason why that happens is because it's the day I'm permitted to have fun. So it's earmarked in time for you to have fun, right? I talked about the amusement park, and that's where I think the Las Vegas slogan that what goes on in Vegas, what happens in Vegas, stays in Vegas. So if you want to have fun, okay, it's okay to have fun, but then we have to make sure that the boundaries are clear. So whatever happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. It's one of the ways to promote people. Okay, now you can have fun, right? Because it's going to stay within the boundaries of that. So here's in a summary what the theory looks like. It has two psychological pillars and then a variety of situational factors. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to show you perhaps one more slide here. Then you can validate that theory. So we have measured this. We have scales to measure those things, and you find that as I told you, the two major forces that predict fun, if you measure fun, is hedonic engagements and sense of liberation, which are mostly orthogonal to one another. It together predicts fun, and then all these various situational predictors help fun, but their effects would be mediated by either hedonic engagement or sense of liberation. I'm going to share maybe one more finding with you is the fact that what is interesting is that fun is particularly grounded in consumption. If you look at experiences that people had and ask them, tell us about experiences of fun, or tell us about experiences of happiness, or tell us about interesting experiences that you have had, and you code what was happening, what kind of experience they share with us. And this was done by independent coders. The happy experiences, interesting experiences that are being described by people, they are pleasant experiences, are marginally, on average, related to fun, related to consumption, sorry. Whereas experiences of fun are significantly or largely experience are connected to consumption. So fun, even though it's not a consumption-specific construct, and experience is very, very, very closely linked to consumption. Naturally, consumption has emerged as a primary mechanism by which people actually achieve fun. It's probably the primary mechanism by which people achieve fun. And the reason why that is, I think it's a lot of it, if you go back to the sociological forces, what the marketplace has provided over the years is a set of avenues to essentially release all these forces that come from the constraints associated with work and with parental constraints or parental duties and other type of constraints that you have, in a way that are socially permissible, right? Because that's legal, that are also commercial purchasable. So this is something for which you have freedom and you have autonomy and agency, and really gives you all the spontaneity that you want if you have the resources, etc. And again, there's more of that in the paper than I can share with you. So I'm going to go straight to, we have also, I could just give you also data in the paper that revolves. We also did the analysis of selfies with the research that we've done, where people uploaded images of them having fun versus being happy, and we content coded those images, and the content coding somehow shows a number of differences in terms of what is fun versus a happy moment, such as fun images on average would have more people, right, which just has to do with connectedness. They tend to be more in commercial venues. They tend to be more likely to have silly faces that has to do with liberation. Whereas happiness images were more likely to involve something where something meaningful has happened. So, for example, people would have pictures of having, pregnant, and here's one here, for example, of pregnancy, or being with the baby, or being being married. You see that here, or getting a pet. So that's what was some of the findings that we had as well. But I'm going to somehow, I'm running out of time here. Only 1 minute left. I will just tell you, in a summary, right, that I think fun is really important for consumer behavior, for business in general. I mean, there's whole industry that rely on that. It turns out that even though lots of people do different things for fun, it all revolves around two major pillars, okay, of hedonic engagement and sense of liberation that need to work together. And that's why we think of it as liberating engagement as being the joint force that really drives the energy of fun. It's not consumption specific, but it's very closely linked to consumption. Consumption is, if there is a place in which consumer behavior is relevant, I think fun is a great area to connect the two. There's a number of situational facilitators that contribute to the experience of fun. There's 4 of those that we documented in the paper. There's some more that we think exists out there. And there's maybe one thing I want to say that maybe that's where I will leave off. We also find that fun is related to happiness, and it's related to happiness in 2 ways. Directly, because when you have fun, you're usually happy. Not the other way around, by the way. It's usually fun leads to happiness rather than happiness leading to fun. So you can be happy without having fun, but if you are having fun, you will be happy. So it's really a direct path to happiness, to, I would say, short-term happiness. But one of the things that emerged in our data, which I think is very interesting, is that when people have fun, very often they realize that they were having fun partly because they were doing the fun experience was one in which they were reconnecting with others. So somehow they say, oh my God, I had so much fun, and they reconnected with their old friend, etc. And I had forgotten how much it was, fun to have my friends, and how much it makes me happy. So fun has this indirect effect as well of reminding people of sources of happiness, right? And so that's another long-term, more like an indirect way in which fun contributes to happiness.